Robert's morning ritual never varied. Up at 6:15 a.m. with military precision, a habit formed during his years working with volatile compounds, where even a minute's carelessness could prove catastrophic. A cup of black coffee on his east-facing porch as the sun rose, watching light play across the rippling surface of his pool. Then precisely at 6:45, the first swim of the day, 20 laps, no more, no less. His neighbors called him the professor behind his back, though he held no academic position. They weren't entirely wrong. Robert approached life with methodical precision. His backyard landscaping followed the golden ratio, plants arranged not just for aesthetics, but for optimal growth patterns based on sun exposure and soil pH levels he monitored weekly. When designing his pool, Robert had rejected 5 different contractors before finding one who understood his vision, a pool that mimicked natural water formations while incorporating cutting-edge filtration technology. The result was a system that required no chlorine, instead utilizing a proprietary biofilter system that kept the water crystal clear without harsh chemicals. It's not just a pool, he'd explained to his skeptical financial advisor. It's a self-sustaining aquatic ecosystem. On Tuesdays, Eleanor Morales, the only local pool maintenance specialist Robert trusted, came to check the system. She'd grown to appreciate Robert's exacting standards and genuine curiosity. Unlike other clients who disappeared when she arrived, Robert followed her around, asking questions about filter microbiology and water chemistry. "You know more about pools than I do," Elena had remarked once. "Why hire me at all?" Robert had smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "Because everyone needs a second set of eyes on their work, Elena. That was the first rule in my lab. Never rely solely on your own observation." His home office walls displayed not family photos but framed patents, 17 in total, most related to slow-release medication delivery systems. The pharmaceutical giant he'd worked for had made billions from those patents. Robert had made enough to retire comfortably but not extravagantly. His greatest satisfaction came not from money, but from knowing his work had improved countless lives. The neighbors knew little about him beyond his meticulousness and occasional kindness, helping Mrs. Abernathy understand her medication schedule after her husband died, or explaining complex homework problems to the Nguyen children when they were brave enough to knock on his door. He wasn't unfriendly, just private, a quality increasingly rare in Sunny Pines, when most lives were lived in full view of the neighborhood Facebook group. Robert's solitude wasn't lonely but purposeful. After decades of corporate meetings and international conferences, the quiet of his backyard sanctuary felt earned. Sometimes, floating in his pool at dusk, watching bats emerge from the nature preserve beyond his property line, he'd think about the chaotic, crowded world he'd retreated from. The constant connectivity, the ceaseless opinions, the endless striving for more, all replaced by this carefully crafted peace. The HOA had seemed a minor inconvenience when he purchased the property, a small tax for the neighborhood's well-maintained roads and underground utilities. In 3 years, he'd received exactly 2 notices, one about his mailbox being 2 inches too tall, which he promptly corrected, and another about excess leaves from his Japanese maples, which he addressed by hiring a weekly gardening service. The HOA president then, a retired dentist named Howard, had been reasonable, even complimenting Robert's landscaping at the one meeting he'd attended. "We need more properties like yours," Howard had said. "Sets a standard without being showy." But Howard had moved to Arizona to be near his grandchildren, and the election for his replacement had seemed too inconsequential for Robert to pay attention to. In retrospect, that would prove to be the first in a series of miscalculations that would transform his sanctuary into a battleground. Robert's sudden celebrity status proved both amusing and occasionally inconvenient. The Wednesday after the Great Gel incident, as local news had dubbed it, he couldn't get through the grocery store without being stopped for selfies. The barista at his usual coffee shop had created a special drink called the Chemist's Revenge, a blue-tinted concoction with tapioca pearls that mimicked his pool's consistency. He declined most interview requests, but had agreed to speak with the local high school's chemistry club, where he gave an impromptu lecture on polymer science that resulted in 3 students changing their college major plans. It wasn't about vengeance, he explained to the wide-eyed teenagers. It was about using chemistry to solve a problem when traditional methods failed. Science gives us options beyond confrontation or capitulation. The most unexpected outcome was the friendship that developed between Robert and Vijay Patil, the HOA vice president who had assumed leadership after Patricia's resignation. A software engineer by training, Vijay shared Robert's appreciation for elegant solutions to complex problems. "I've been wanting to overhaul the HOA approach for years," Vijay confessed during one of their now regular Sunday chess matches on Robert's patio. Patricia's scorched earth style made everyone afraid to speak up. "Your blue gel was the catalyst we needed, chemically and socially." Together, they drafted a complete revision of the HOA bylaws, simplifying the 342-page monstrosity into a reasonable 40-page document that emphasized community cooperation rather than punitive enforcement. Every change was put to a neighborhood vote, with unprecedented participation rates. The most popular revision was unofficially known as the Daniels Clause, a provision requiring any HOA board member who received 3 community complaints for overreach to undergo a recall vote. The measure passed with 97% approval. Robert's element table friends remained fascinated by the gel pool long after the controversy faded. Dr. Meena Gupta, a materials scientist from his former company, had taken extensive samples and was exploring medical applications for the formula. "The stability at room temperature is remarkable," she told Robert during a visit. "This could revolutionize drug delivery systems for remote regions without refrigeration." Robert had signed over the formula rights to Meena's research team with one condition: that any resulting patents include a provision for reduced pricing in developing countries. "It seems fitting," he told her, "that something created as a barrier could ultimately help connect people to resources they need." The most meaningful moment came 6 months after the incident, during the Sunny Pines Summer Festival, an event that had previously featured competitive lawn judging and citations for improper decoration placement under Patricia's regime. Robert had declined the chairmanship but had agreed to host the opening reception at his home. As neighbors mingled around his now normal pool, though some children still asked hopefully if he might gel it up again someday, Stephanie Anderson, whose family had been among the first unauthorized swimmers during Patricia's commandeering, approached Robert with a small, wrapped package. "The neighborhood wanted you to have this," she said, handing him the gift. It was unanimously approved, a first in Sunny Pines history. Inside was a custom-made plaque for his garden gate. The inscription read, "The Daniels Laboratory, where chemistry meets community." Robert found himself unexpectedly moved. For decades, he had defined himself by his work, his precision, his solitude. Now, in the autumn of his life, he had inadvertently become something else entirely, a cornerstone of a community he had never sought to join, but now couldn't imagine living without. That night, after everyone had gone home, he sat by his pool with a glass of bourbon, watching the underwater lights illuminate the water. No trace of blue gel remained, but something of the experience lingered, a molecular change in how he viewed his retirement, his neighbors, and himself. Officer Rodriguez approached the scene with the casual confidence of a man who'd reviewed the relevant statutes the night before. Robert had visited the police station yesterday, bringing documentation, security camera footage, and, most persuasively, a box of artisanal donuts from the bakery that Officer Rodriguez's wife owned. "Morning, Mr. Daniels," the officer nodded, adjusting his utility belt. "Ma'am?" He acknowledged Patricia with professional neutrality. "Officer, I want to file a complaint," Patricia began, her voice rising to the particular pitch that neighborhood dogs had learned to fear. "This man has deliberately sabotaged a community resource." Robert maintained his scientific composure. "Officer Rodriguez, as we discussed yesterday, my property has been subjected to unauthorized access under the pretense of a questionable HOA bylaw amendment. I've taken legal steps to secure my private property while addressing a chemical balance issue." The officer nodded, his face impressively impassive. "Ma'am, do you have documentation authorizing your presence on Mr. Daniels' property today?" Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a tropical fish suddenly finding itself in Arctic waters. I'm the HOA president. I don't need." "Actually, you do," Officer Rodriguez interrupted gently. "Mr. Daniels has filed formal trespass warnings with our department. Without a court order or his express permission, you're currently in violation of County Code 53.2. Children had gathered at the pool's edge, pushing small toys into the gel surface and shrieking with delight as they bounced back. Parents stood awkwardly, caught between the spectacle of the gelatinous pool and the confrontation unfolding. This substance could be dangerous. Patricia tried again, gesturing wildly toward the pool. "There are children present." Robert stepped forward, producing another document from his binder. "This is certification from Biochem Labs, confirming that this compound is food-grade, non-toxic, and environmentally neutral. The same substance is used in children's toys, high-end desserts, and medical hydrogels. It meets all EPA and FDA standards for recreational contact." A little girl, perhaps 7 years old, had laid flat on her stomach across the gel surface, her arms and legs spread like a starfish. "Mommy, look, I'm floating," she called out, her joy infectious. "Furthermore," Robert continued, "there's no Sunny Pines HOA bylaw regulating the viscosity of private water features. I've reviewed all 342 pages of regulations. The only requirement is that pools meet health and safety standards, which this," he gestured toward his transformed pool, "undeniably does." Patricia's face had taken on the particular shade of red that medical professionals associate with dangerously elevated blood pressure. "The HOA legal team will." "Will what?" Robert interrupted, his patience finally evaporating. "Will explain to a judge how you fabricated authority to commandeer private property. How you allowed uninvited strangers to consume my personal belongings. How you attempted to have my pool house lock changed without my permission." The crowd had grown larger as neighbors from surrounding houses arrived, drawn by the commotion. Robert noticed several phones recording the confrontation, including Mrs. Abernathy, the 78-year-old widow he'd helped with her medications, who was live-streaming the entire scene with surprising technical proficiency. "Your reign of terror is over, Patricia," Robert said, lowering his voice to ensure everyone leaned in to hear. "You used the HOA bylaws as a weapon. I'm using science as a shield." A slow clap started somewhere in the back of the crowd. Robert couldn't identify who began it, but soon the applause spread, building into a spontaneous ovation. Several neighbors he barely knew approached to pat his back in congratulations. Patricia stood isolated in a growing circle of space, clutching Robert's binder to her chest like armor. Her perfect blonde bob seemed to deflate slightly as she surveyed the crowd, suddenly recognizing the tribunal of public opinion had rendered its verdict, and it wasn't in her favor. The secret to Robert's plan wasn't just the chemistry, it was the theater of it all. Wednesday morning, he called Elena, his pool maintenance specialist. "I need you to come by, but not for the usual service," he explained. "And I need you in full hazmat gear." "Hazmat? Robert, what are you?" "Double your usual rate, plus a bonus," he interrupted. "And I'll explain everything when you get here." Elena arrived an hour later, her truck conspicuously parked at the curb, "Professional Pool Services" emblazoned on its side. She emerged wearing the full protective suit Robert had requested, complete with respirator mask and face shield. "This better be good." Her muffled voice came through the mask as neighbors began peering through windows. Robert, also in full protective gear, handed her a clipboard with official-looking forms. "Walk around the pool. Take samples. Look concerned. The chemicals are completely harmless, but no one else needs to know that." As they performed their theatrical inspection, Robert noticed Patricia's kitchen curtain twitch. Perfect. The neighborhood watch was on duty. "The real chemistry is fascinating," Robert explained as they made a show of testing water samples. "The polymer chains form a semi-solid matrix while remaining completely non-toxic. The same base compound is used in disposable diapers. It's what absorbs the liquid. Elena, now genuinely interested despite her initial skepticism, examined the chemical equations Robert had drawn out. So it's basically fancy jello? Molecularly, yes, but engineered to be stable at a much larger scale and reversible with the right catalyst. Robert's eyes glinted with the excitement he hadn't felt since his research days. The proportions are the tricky part. Too much cross-linking agent and it becomes rubber. Too little and it's just cloudy water. By mid-afternoon, they had established a perimeter of yellow caution tape around Robert's property. Elena's truck had been joined by a rented van with environmental CRVCS magnetically attached to its sides. Another touch of Robert's theatrical genius. When Patricia inevitably appeared, power walking purposefully toward them in her tennis whites, Robert was ready. "What's going on here?" she demanded, stopping short of the caution tape. "The Mendez family has the 3 to 5 p.m. slot today." "Ah, Patricia," Robert replied calmly, raising his face shield. "I'm afraid there's been a chemical situation requiring professional intervention. County Environmental Code 375.2 requires immediate restriction of access." He handed her a document, authentic-looking but entirely fabricated, detailing emergency pool treatment protocols. The official county seal, a high-resolution image he downloaded and carefully incorporated, gleamed at the top. But the community schedule takes a backseat to county environmental regulations. Robert finished for her. "I've already filed the necessary paperwork with both the county and state environmental agencies. The treatment requires 72 hours minimum, possibly longer depending on test results." Patricia's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What exactly are you treating for?" Robert had anticipated this question. He pulled out a scientific journal, a legitimate publication where his former colleague had published an article about rare waterborne polymers, and flipped to a highlighted passage. "Polyhexamethylene biguanide destabilization," he said solemnly, using a real chemical compound that sounded sufficiently alarming, potentially quite serious if not addressed promptly. Elena, catching on quickly, nodded gravely. "We've seen 3 cases in the county already this month. The humidity and unusual temperature patterns create perfect conditions." Patricia frowned, clearly torn between suspicion and fear of potential liability. The HOA should have been notified before any treatments. Emergency protocols supersede notification requirements. Robert countered smoothly. "But I've copied the HOA board on all filings," he added, referring to emails he'd sent to a fake environmental agency address that blind copied the HOA board. Messages filled with intimidating scientific jargon and official-looking case numbers. As Patricia retreated, already typing furiously on her phone, Robert and Elena exchanged subtle nods of satisfaction. The perimeter was secure. The stage was set. Now the actual chemistry could begin. Robert pulled out his phone and began recording, his hands trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Patricia, I need to see the actual bylaw amendment you're referring to," he insisted, voice steady despite his inner turmoil. "Not your summary of it." Patricia's smile tightened as she flipped through her binder with manicured nails, painted the exact shade of the Sunny Pines official logo. Section 5, Paragraph 12, Amendment 247B. She recited, then held up a page with fluorescent yellow highlighting. "Passed unanimously on Tuesday, properly filed with county records on Thursday." Robert squinted at the legal language, searching for loopholes. The amendment was cleverly worded, aesthetic improvements with community access provisions, rather than the straightforward theft it actually represented. "This can't possibly be legal," Robert argued, gesturing toward the children now playing Marco Polo in his meticulously balanced water. "I have grandfathered exemptions that predate these bylaws." Patricia's eyes gleamed with the particular satisfaction of someone who'd anticipated every objection. "Your exemptions apply to structural modifications and landscaping variances, Robert, not usage designations." She patted his arm condescendingly. "We checked with our attorney. It's all quite airtight. Nearby, a woman Robert vaguely recognized as living 3 streets over was rifling through his pool house, examining his collection of specialized maintenance equipment. "Excuse me," Robert called out. "Those tools are expensive and calibrated precisely for—" "Oh, this is all community property now too," Patricia interjected smoothly. "Pool accessories fall under the same amendment. Don't worry, we'll create a sign-out sheet." A splash of bourbon, his rare small batch Kentucky Reserve, hit Robert's deck as someone knocked over a glass. The liquid seeped between the teak planks he'd hand-selected and installed himself. "That's a $200 bottle of bourbon," he said quietly. Patricia shrugged. "You should store your valuables more securely if you're concerned. The HOA isn't responsible for personal items left in community areas." Robert took a deep breath, summoning the calm that had served him well during pharmaceutical emergencies. "Patricia, this is private property purchased with my personal funds. These people are trespassing." Patricia's smile never wavered. "Actually, according to our bylaws as amended, they're authorized users of a community resource. Check your HOA agreement, Section 3, which you signed when purchasing this property. Homeowners acknowledge that amenities may be redesignated as community resources with proper board approval." Robert had read that section, but had understood amenities to mean the existing neighborhood playground and tennis courts, not his private backyard. "I'll be contacting my attorney," Robert said firmly. "Of course," Patricia nodded, unconcerned. "In the meantime, the community schedule stands. The Williams family has the 8 to 10 a.m. slot tomorrow, followed by the Petersons from 10 noon. As if to punctuate her victory, a child cannonballed into the deep end, splashing Robert's pressed khakis. Patricia checked her watch, a gaudy diamond-encrusted thing that matched her oversized earrings. "Oh, and we'll need your pool house key. The Nguyen family wants to use the bathroom, and we can't have community members locked out of facilities." When Robert refused, Patricia made a show of calling a locksmith while announcing to the gathered families that Mr. Daniels is being uncooperative with community policies. That evening, after everyone had finally cleared out, leaving behind floating chip bags, sunscreen slicks on the water's surface, and a broken pool thermometer, Robert sat on his soiled deck furniture, surveying the damage, his phone pinged with a notification, a new HOA community message. "Sunny Pines Community Schedule Update. The Daniels Pool will now be available until 9 p.m. on weekends to accommodate working families. Please respect quiet hours after 9 p.m. Day passes for guests available at the HOA office for $10. Robert closed his eyes and pictured the molecular structure of sodium polyacrylate, its cross-linked polymer chains forming intricate networks. In chemistry, he'd always found solutions to seemingly impossible problems. This would be no different, just another puzzle requiring the right formula.